Welcome to the Flat Earth Debate Live. I'm your host, Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon and join button if you'd like to become a Nathan Oakley 1980 channel member and keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you would like to support the channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live. There's also a PayPal, Patreon and crypto link in the info box below the video. Also below this video there is a link to get £50 for swapping your UK electricity supplier to Octopus Energy. Most importantly, if you'd like to join the discussion, simply mute the page you are currently watching, then click the link in the info box below this video to join the panel and express your views on the nature of Earth. If you do join, please don't swear. If you do, you'll be ejected, and if you are, please don't try to rejoin the stream using sock accounts. You'll be warmly welcomed back on the next stream. Please also share the show on social media. Sharing the show obviously increases the live audience, but this in turn increases the chances of a more diverse panel, so please share the show on Facebook and Twitter. One last time, if you're new to the channel or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon and join button to keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. Now we are joined by 10th Man, Sleeping Warrior, Neil, Brian's Logic, Elijah, and a whole bunch of people in Discord, so welcome one and all. And Arwin.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hey, good morning. Hello, hello.
What's up, guys?
Guy.
Good afternoon. Hello.
Relative, but yeah.
I like
Sky,
pickles.
from my perception, sky's up.
What?
All right, can I hijack this conversation and continue with something?
Any scientific evidence of gravity?
Right, so we were discussing that in the pre-show. Can we continue that?
Push can.
Right. I was thinking, you know how you said, regardless of how you think of why there's a, more dense atmosphere at the bottom of the ground, there's still more pressure down on the ground and less pressure the higher you go. So that's still a thing, regardless of how you
That's
say
because of the magnitude of the
this
gas
is
in
hot.
question.
Hold on, let him get to the end of his question. Go ahead, Righteous.
So there's still this like vector with density.
Is there? Density? You're talking about pressure and convoluting it with density. You think there's more dense gases? We covered this in the pre-show. It's the same mixture of gases regardless. The pressure changes because there's more of it produced at ground level. But that doesn't change the density.
All right.
Pressure.
Well, if it's more pressure, isn't that more dense though?
There's
There's a
more
difference?
pressure. More of it pressing, it's hitting the walls of the container more often. Because there's more of it in a smaller amount of space.
So the more you have, the more you can say it's dense though, no?
No, the greater the pressure.
There's two ways. Sorry, there's a mix-up happening here. Temperature can create extra pressure, or a smaller container. So you can take the same amount of gas, put it in a smaller container, and there'll be more pressure. Or you can leave it in the big container and heat it up, and it'll be more pressure.
You want to qualify density in terms of the atomic weight of a gas, right? You're going to be comparing apples with oranges in terms of one gas compared to another and its density. But if you're comparing an inhomogeneous anisotropic mixture of gases and one is at a higher density than the other, that's all that's changed. The density hasn't changed, the pressure has.
All right, so then let's just stick with pressure. There's no need to go into density.
Oh, thank
So there's still like a pressure. I'm sorry.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, that's not 100% true.
Okay, go on,
Because
Brian.
convection,
Correct me.
Convection changes. Convection is based on the changing. Well, it's temperature changing density, which causes convection.
Changing
So
the
convection
density.
is a constant change of densities.
Changing density.
Yeah, convection changes density. It's warm air is heated and it's rising as cooler air is flowing down to replace it. So it's like they replace each other constantly. That's what convection is.
That's changing the pressure.
No, it's a change in temperature, which also changes the density.
Adam, am I missing
The
something
cooler
here?
air, the
Adam,
cooler air actually
hold on.
changes the density.
Get this settled. I'm second guessing myself now. Am I missing something,
Okay.
Adam? Are you there?
Yeah. It's a funny one, isn't it? Because the word density, when we talk about gas, it's only kind of relevant if you kept the temperature the same, and keep the volume fixed and the amount fixed. Then you've got a kind of different interpretation, but you've still got the same density, but the particles are moving faster. So the particle speed, does that have an additional impact? Is it of the same magnitude of actually increasing the density? No. But will it have an effect? Yes, but probably negligible, I would suggest, in terms of aerodynamics and the likes. But still got to have an effect because you are changing part of the behaviour. But me and QE were talking about this last night. It's odd.
Yeah, but Adam,
But the density of the
change-
particles never changes, does it?
it
the
does.
number of-
It does with
Hold
temperature.
on, Brian. We know your position. I disagree.
Right.
We're seeing what Adam's got to say on it.
But-
Go ahead, Adam.
What are we keeping fixed? We're keeping the volume fixed. Yeah. And we're just increasing the temperature. Yeah. And if that's the case, then we don't have any extra molecules. We just have the same molecules moving faster. Which, like I say, isn't equivalent to increasing the density per se. It will have an effect, but it's not an equivalent way of saying it, because you've still got, say, 6 moles of gas in the cylinder. Now you've got 6 moles of gas at 10 degrees higher. So, you know.
Okay, but if
That's a good comparison.
if you've got a cycle, yeah, and that cycle is introducing, by way of phase change, more gas into the system, is that a density increase? If so, I'm wrong and Brian's right.
If you're putting more gas into the system, then you've got a density increase. But this is in a dynamic
Brian.
system. More gas in one area pushes more out the other. So, but if you're talking about within a contained system, if I take a contained system and have 6 moles of gas and then add an extra 1 mole, yeah, technically it's more dense. Yeah.
So Brian's right. I was wrong.
And
You'll increase the pressure as
sorry.
well. Yeah, you'll increase the pressure as well, but you've actually increased the density. You could increase the pressure by raising the temperature and not adding more. That wouldn't affect the density of that sealed container.
Fine. Brian's right, I was
Yeah,
wrong.
temperature will also change the density. Convection works off of a change of density. I'm not making this up. This is like official. Like warm air rise. Think about a hot air balloon. Right, the air becomes less dense, and that's why like helium is less dense in a balloon. It's less dense than the air around it, so it is displaced up to it. But
You change its behavior. It's difficult to call. See, I wouldn't say less dense per se, because if you're going to discuss it, you've got to kind of put it into a container to discuss its behavior, so you can describe its behavior.
The problem we've got, Brian, right, is the same problem we're going to have when we try and qualify this in terms of what's the cause. What causes the balloon to rise up through the air when you heat up the gas that's inside it? Well, what are you doing? Well, you're creating the gas to have a more excitable circumstance. So, okay, so you could say, well, is it the pressure that's increasing? Well, no. Is it the density that's increasing that's causing it to rise up? Well, no, unless you give it some sort of causal attribution, which you do in terms of structural support. Well, how are you going to define it? You can't. The reason you can't is because this is an entropic effect. So therefore, when you start getting down to the what's causing it aspect, you're trying to figure out the cause of entropy, and you're never going to achieve it.
well, I have to say that you're missing a major point here, because convection, right, is based on within a gas is based on the changing of density of the gas. So the warmer gas moves more, but is also less dense, and the cooler gas moves less and is more dense. When you turn that gas into a liquid, you use water. More dense and less dense water will give it. Warm water and cold water have 2 different densities, and the plimsoll lying on a ship is the proof of that. So,
Okay.
gas and water are, although one is bonded and one is unbonded, they still matter. They still are affected by temperature the same.
No, not really.
No, I don't agree at all.
It's reversed, actually. So a liquid will become less viscous, won't it, the more we add heat? And the reverse, as you were saying, we add heat within a container. We make the gas. See, gas behavior is just, it's not comparable. It does different things. It's not bonded. Therefore, everything's individual. So, no, I'd say you can't directly draw that comparison. If you add heat, you get this effect and the same effect in a different phase.
Okay, then what causes the colder air to flow down the way?
You're asking,
hold
on,
Brian,
Adam.
you can go and look up and no one has an answer.
Exactly.
It's called
You're asking.
entropy.
Well,
Your question's about change, Brian.
It's density.
Brian,
No, they don't.
you're asking a question
No,
about
they don't.
change.
They go hot air goes to cold, and then the only way they can demonstrate it and explain it is to stick some air in a balloon and then do a buoyancy calculation. What they can't do is explain it properly, just within the molecule behavior.
Right, Brian, you started off asking about something that starts with something changing. Well, what's the single word, Adam, that describes entropy?
Those change.
Change. Right. So you're trying to figure out when this change occurs, how is the causal relationship established? I think this is so futile.
I don't think so at all. I think it's absolutely extremely important. And I think that you're missing a major important point. Gases still matter. It's still affected in the same way as water is affected.
No, it isn't.
Or solids are affected.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
Things that, hang on. The temperature affects them all the same way. Has the same effect on all of them.
Not true. That's just simply not true.
Well, how come warm gas goes up, warm air goes up, and cool air flows down?
And warm water undergoes a phase change.
If I drop a ball bearing through some syrup, the contact time is greater than if I warm that syrup up, individually. Now, when you do it with a gas, you're not getting the two behaviors, because you've got intermolecular bonding and you've got gas behavior. The two aren't analogous. I don't see why, because you've got the effects of stuff that's got intermolecular bonds, and then you've got something that you're trying to describe in fluid dynamics, but fundamentally isn't. It's individual particles that we have to approximate to and call it fluid dynamics with air, but it's not. It's just the only way of dealing with that many individual particles.
Okay, well, what about this then? You take a balloon, right, with gas in it, and you put it into a warm, very warm environment. That gas will expand out that balloon the warmer it gets. That gas, right, what happens is the heat causes all the little particles to move further and further apart. You put that same balloon into liquid nitrogen and it will all deflate. It'll all go down, it'll all start to concentrate together. It'll still be
the reason they're able to increase their distance is that they're now going faster, therefore hitting the walls of the balloon harder, therefore stretching the balloon. Therefore, that's what gives them the greater space. If you do that in a rigid container, the space doesn't change. It's just the speed changes, so the pressure increases. See, when the balloon expands, it negates some of the pressure increase.
This is Boyle's law.
With the egg, wasn't it?
Just hold on. This is Boyle's law. This is what's currently being discussed, just so the audience can look it up after the fact. Boyle's law.
That's what there's not actually any more gas particles there. It's just that the gas particles that are there are behaving a lot more energetically.
Yeah, they're hitting the container more often with a greater force. So when you heat it up, it expands the container. When they're hitting it less often with less force, it decreases the size of the container. In the case of a balloon, because it's variable, because it's stretchy.
Yeah, so density is not changing at all.
Not in this
unless
scenario,
you add more gas particles.
Not unless you add more gas, no.
Okay, I don't see how what you're saying is debunking what I'm saying. It's like the more heat, the more movement, the more expansion. The less heat, the less
We're
movement,
not
the less
disagreeing with
expansion.
you. We're not. We're saying that's Boyle's law. But what? As soon as you start trying to say why, that's when we run into problems.
Okay,
Flatroids
look, this is something I've noticed. It's something I've noticed, right, on the panel, right? Do you think gas is magic? Gas and water are both matter. Water is affected by temperature. Heat can cause water to become less dense. Cold can cause water to become more dense. Heat can cause gas to expand, and cold can cause gas to deflate. Let's just say, for want of a better term. That's still matter. Matter is still matter. There's still certain laws that it has to avoid to.
It doesn't cause it to deflate.
Well, yeah, but I looked for it. Like, that was the only word I said, for the want of a better term.
This is what I'm saying. It's complex. You can't use comparable terms. They're not comparable. They're two different phases. So when we try to equate the two, we run into the problems caused by the very distinctly different behaviors. One are individual molecules acting individually. The other, is a fluid where all the molecules are linked and their fluidness, has an effect. There's intermolecular bonding. So you can't draw that comparison. In terms of your language of structural support, there is structural support within the intermolecular bonding, but there is no direct structural support. There's just more collisions.
But you're missing the point. Matter is still matter. I'm not even trying to talk about structural support. I'm just talking about the base facts that matter is affected by hot and cold. Matter is still matter.
Well, we're not denying that. We're not denying that. We're just saying to try and put causation, to it is not possible in my report.
What does it matter?
It's just matter in a different phase.
Hold on. Oh, that's a good question from Neil. Hold on, Brian. That's a good question, Neil. What does it matter? Well, because it's a fundamental question about the nature of our reality. So it's a very, very important question, and that's why Brian is asking. And it's not an invalid question. If when you talk about the nature of reality, and then you talk about the second law of thermodynamics or entropy law, that's change over time. Crucial. That's what we're dealing with when we live. So why discuss it? Well, because it's fascinating. However, there's all the laws in the world that describes gas, there's loads of them. Right, and they all hold true as descriptions of what gas does. None of them are establishing cause, and I don't think we ever will. Because when you get down to the nitty-gritty of where did it all begin, that's what you've got to get to when you're talking about how did change over time begin, so that you can establish the cause of it. Well, what do you get down to when you start looking at the beginning of time? Well, you start getting into the ontological primitives. That's where you end up.
I was like making a joke, like, what does it matter? Does it matter? Yeah, it matters.
No, but it's still a good question, Neil. Yeah.
Yes, Nathan.
Well, I have to disagree. I have to disagree. Gas is still affected, and density of the concentration of gas, if you want to call it expanding in one way due to more movement, and despanding with less movement, it's still affected by hot and cold. Warm air still rises and cooler air still flows down. This is a constant.
No one's disagreeing with that.
Yeah, but you're trying to say that the density doesn't change.
I don't understand that either.
Discussing density and pressure in those conditions.
I don't know what you're saying. I honestly don't know what you're saying, because
I'm saying it. It's hard to argue in the air because it's so dynamic. Yeah. But if we were describing systems where we keep the volume the same, the number of molecules the same, and we affect the temperature, then technically that's not a change in density. Because the number of molecules per centimeter cubed is still the same. They're just moving faster in that space.
Exactly. Yeah, but if they're moving around more, are they not more expanded?
No.
Well,
they're still in a fixed volume. They're still moving in that same number of centimeters cubed, the same containment. So at any one snapshot in time, yeah, their density is the same, isn't it? Because the number of molecules per centimeter cubed is the same. Now, the differential is the pressure they exert. Because they're moving faster, they'll exert more pressure from the same density.
Okay, well, what about when you cool it down enough and it goes into a liquid form? I mean, it has to become get to a certain point where it phase changes to
So
liquid.
in a liquid, then no longer is the volume of the matter dictated by the container. Suddenly, the container will be larger than the volume. Now, the volume of the liquid is dictated by the temperature and the constriction of intermolecular bonding.
Yeah, but the point I'm making is to turn the gas into a liquid, it's temperature that does it. Like, how can liquid have a change in density, and even solids have a change in density due to temperature? But gas, no, there's no change in density. I mean, gas is still matter. It's still matter. What causes warm air to go up and cooler air?
There you go again. There he goes again.
Yeah, but
What causes it, eh?
Okay, so when you say density, how do you describe the density of a single molecule? Because that's what we're talking about. Yeah, when we're talking about liquids, we're talking about all those molecules that are joined. Yeah, same with solids. So we can express that. But when we've only got one molecule, then it's very difficult to talk about density in gases because there's slightly different concepts. If you see what I mean, because we can increase the temperature and fiddle about with the pressure, and because we're talking about individual molecule behavior here, not the behavior of a volume of liquid, which has its own innate as the whole. It acts as a whole, doesn't it? Not as individual molecules. Yeah, so that's the difference for me.
Yeah, but the water, let's say water, let's just say liquid, right? When it becomes less dense, right, all the molecules spread out. Yeah? Is that not true?
No, the intermolecular bonds become larger, don't they? But they don't spread out and don't. The second they don't have those intermolecular bonds, it becomes a gas.
Yeah, but what makes them less dense then? Because less dense is a less concentration, let's say, per square foot. Let's just say.
Yeah, because they're more flowy, aren't they? So and the gap will increase slightly. They're vibrating slightly less, so they'll less energy. So they're not separate, are they? In a liquid.
No, but the point I'm making is I'm speaking about, we have to get into what is density then, because this is where we have to get to, because like I understand liquids and solids are bonded and gases are not, but I'm talking about density. What does more dense mean and what does less dense mean in general?
Excellent question.
Because
excellent
that's the question.
Well, you're asking something that when you get to the gas part, you start qualifying things differently. So when you come to the solid or the liquid, you stick it on a scale and it's relatively easy to qualify it and you can give it a mole value, right? But what Adam's saying is when you've got a square centimetre of wood and you've got a square centimetre of any liquid and you've got a square centimetre of a gas, the gas can be under all sorts of different scenarios. When you've got 1 square centimetre, you can ram more of it in there, but then you start having to qualify it in terms of its pressure, as opposed to its mole value. Well, the mole value and what the gas particle as an individual, as Adam's saying, doesn't change a whole great deal. It's only dictated by the space it's got to move around in. Well, it's just moving around, right? Well, yeah, but it hits other things more often. So, okay, but it's still just moving around. Yeah, but that has an adverse effect on the conditions that it's in and all the other gases around it are in, and the force exerted on the walls of the container. So then you start moving over to qualifying it in pressure. So in other words, you've got these two different concepts that don't interlace when you go past that phase change. So yeah, you're right. When you try and qualify things in terms of their density, it gets very convoluted when you start qualifying that for gas, because it doesn't fit into the convention anymore very well.
Okay.
What if we talk about it in terms of compressibility of a state of matter?
Well, when you're talking about a liquid and a solid, you've got different parameters to when you've got something that's got inherently just gaps around it. And if you this is Boyle's law again, when you start decreasing the size of the container, you're decreasing the size of the gaps in between, so the collisions increase. Well, that's going to have an adverse effect on the pressure. How many times those gas particles hit the walls of the container is going to be dictated by how closely rammed together they are. Obviously, if they're much, much closer together, they're much, much more likely to hit the walls of the container. Therefore, the pressure increases. But we're in a different convention now.
Well, are we? Because we have matter. Matter is still matter. It didn't turn into something else. The matter that was a liquid is now a gas.
We can't qualify it in terms of the amount of force it exerts on the walls of its container, because it's not expanding in all directions when you've got a liquid.
Yeah, okay, but gas, I mean, if you're heating gas, it will rise. When you cool gas, it will go down. So it will flow down. That's what convection is described as. So what causes the warm to rise and the cool to go down? Because
Stop. Adam, when you ask the question that Brian has just done, what causes hot to cold? What's that process called, by the way? Hot to cold?
Entropy.
I know entropy. Yeah.
So you're asking what causes entropy? That's your question, Brian.
Yeah.
But I'm not. I'm asking why.
Yeah, you are. You don't have to like it. You're asking what causes entropy. You don't have to like it.
Okay. Warm water is less dense than cold water, right? Warm water will rise and cold water will fall. But yet gas does the same thing. But yet we don't attribute density to it. Why not?
Because in terms of mole values, you can change it, and then you've got to have parameters around it to describe it within a slightly different convention. So how much pressure you've got is based on the amount of heat, could be varied. We've already covered all of these things, Brian. But you haven't just got a set amount per square centimetre like you would with a gas or a liquid. So suddenly you're into, well, how much have we forced into the container? What pressure's it at? What heat's it at? Things that won't vary the other two to the same degree. So you're into convention. You're just trying to describe how it happens. And you've got a reasonable convention that works reasonably well for liquid and solid. Then you move into gas and go, well, that convention doesn't work anymore. So let's use a different convention. But that means it's not universal for all. Well, isn't that what the fundies are on a globe want to seek out? Universal laws for everything? Well, unfortunately, life's not that simple. We live in a beautiful and complex world that we're struggling to even describe, let alone explain.
That's what I wanted to say. I'm all for investigation, but we're going to start trying to figure out how God did it, because God is the one that has these answers.
When we're trying to compare the two, just the only example is I can give is if we take a mole of water, its volume and consequent density is going to be defined just by the temperature. There's slight variances in that phase, but it'll be pretty steady, around about 1 centimetre cube. You know what I mean? So there's going to be very little variance, but the only thing that varying it there is the temperature. The only purpose of the container is to stop it running away. Yeah, it's not affecting its density. But if we take the difference with a gas, we have to have containment to be able to try and measure it. If we apply that temperature change, then actually a factor with regards to we're thinking of its density, or as you're saying, which it isn't because its density doesn't change. But the other factor, as well as the temperature, which plays a massive part, is the actual container. That isn't relevant to defining it for a liquid.
Okay.
Brian, do you remember your last question? I just want to say that I agree with what your question. I agree with your point. Your last question, if you can remember what you asked, ask it again.
You'll have to remind me, Anthony. I'm after doing a lot of thinking since then.
He said when we talk about like solids and liquids, we talk about density being the cause, but why is it not the same for gases, or words to that effect?
Yes, yeah, I do. It's like it's still matter. Why do we have to describe it different for gases when gases do behave the same under? Well, when they might be unbonded, but they have similar behavior when they change in temperature.
No, they don't. That's your problem. That's a fallacy.
Well,
that's the problem.
What? How is it?
Just because everything's matter doesn't mean they all react the same, and that's why we have different phases of matter, right?
Well, I'm talking about temperature. How temperature affects these things. That's what I
How
was talking about.
temperature, if you're talking about gases, then you have to take 3 factors into account every single time. Pressure, temperature, volume. You always have to take those 3. Never leave one out, because as soon as you do that, you're screwed.
What's the fallacy called for a category error? What's it called?
Fallacy of division.
Fallacy of division.
I definitely agree.
Okay. Okay.
Inferring that something is true of one or more of the parts from the fact that it's true of the whole.
Okay, now I'm going to throw a cat amongst the pigeons. Who actually measured and counted all the gas molecules?
Me.
What?
Took me a very long time.
Because that is that not just a description?
What are you talking about?
A calculated description for the ideal gas law.
What is the ideal gas law?
Well, PV equals nRT.
Okay. What does P mean?
Pressure.
What does V mean?
Volume of container.
What does T mean?
Temperature.
There you go. N?
Boom.
N is number of molecules.
R?
And R, gas constant.
Yep.
Yeah.
So PV equals nRT, right? So what does that have to do with your counting of gas molecules?
Give props to Brian. Give props to Brian. He knew exactly what all PV equals nRT stood for on the spot.
I think all I'd say with that, Brian, is it's calculated, but it's confirmed, isn't it? So, and it's done with molar stuff, so transfer and the like. So 24, I think it's 20. What is it? 22.4 liters, isn't it? That a mole of gas will occupy at STP. Yeah. So again, you see, you have to qualify its behaviour with everything in the case. Yeah, because it's the only way to describe it. It has to have those extra parameters, whereas liquids and solids don't.
Yeah, but Adam, the PV equals nRT is describing behavior. There's nobody, like, I mean, when they say that, like, people, I've heard people say the gas moves about at 500 meters a second. Now, I've read it moves it.
That depends.
As an average, right? Just people, just let me finish what I'm saying. I've heard people say it moves at 6, and I've read it moves at 7 and 750. The point is that is a description. Nobody counted all these things. Nobody counted. Nobody can measure that. So it's a way of describing it. Well, how do you measure a gas molecule moving at that speed?
You can. I can't think of it right off the bat, but you can. Adam, help me.
No, man, this is like 20 odd years ago, and I'm racking my brain. I suppose fundamentally, I would give you that there's convention in it, Brian. If you're asking, has somebody counted the individual molecules? No, there's a level of convention, and it's molar convention, which I think
it's molar, right?
Yeah. So
what's the actual problem?
I'd concede we've not counted them individually.
This started off, John, with me talking about convection and how convection is described as air that's heated becomes less dense and rises, and cooler air then replaces it as it's flowing down. That's how convection is described. And
with gravity, by the way.
Adam and Nathan are saying that the use of the word density with gases is not adequate. But I pointed out that the exact same thing happens with heat and cold with liquids and solids. Liquids and solids are affected the same way as gases.
That's why you're off, because gases, liquids, and solids are all different. That's why they have different names.
Okay, well, when you heat liquid, it becomes less dense.
Very minutely. It depends on what liquid you're talking about, too.
Well, I use the plimsoll line on ships as an example area, because the plimsoll line on ships.
What does that have to do with liquids and solids?
because the plimsoll line change as you go into warmer waters, you're going to find that the boat is going to be further down in the water line because of the density of the water. That's why he's using plimsoll lines.
Relative salinity is going to have an effect as well.
Yeah, you got a bunch of factors here you're not taking into account, dudes.
Well, what I am taking things into account. It's just the gas, warm. Well, let's say hot air rises, cooler air fall. It doesn't fall, but it flows down. It replaces, like a replacement. The warm air replaces the cooler air. The cooler air replaces the warm air.
And does hot
To your
liquid?
point,
Hold on,
yeah.
Brian. Does hot liquid do that?
Yes.
Are you saying
Hot
it
liquid?
expands out to fill the container? Liquid does that?
No,
does
it replaces. Warm and cold replaces.
No, no.
When you boil water, that's what's happening. It's convection.
No, not the phase change. Just the water, the liquid water. Right.
Yeah,
so you can change it within it.
Replaces. Yeah.
Hold on, just let me get to the end of my example. So you change it within the parameters prior to phase change. Now, don't even get into the nitty gritty. If some of it at the surface will change phase, I don't care. As a whole, the majority of the water stays within the same liquid state. Does that expand to fill a container in all directions?
But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the temperature and what temperature does to it.
Yeah.
I'm talking about convection.
Yeah. I'm just saying, does it do that or not?
But water doesn't water doesn't expand out of it what you put it into.
Okay, so we can agree then that they are fundamentally different in terms of what they are and what they do then.
Yes.
Well, there you go.
Temperature, how are they affected differently by temperature?
You're trying to look for commonalities in things that are fundamentally different. Fascinating, but not very useful.
Warm water, if you heat water underneath, the warm water will rise. As it cools, it will go back down. That's a circular type of a cycle that happens when you boil a pot of water. That's what happens. Warm air will rise, cooler air will replace it.
Cooler air.
Yeah.
I'm not understanding the question.
The question is, what is the cause of this change over time?
What is the cause of the change over time of what?
In this case, universally applicable change, description for that change, applicable to all phases. Not achievable in my opinion, trying to ascertain the cause of entropy.
That's correct.
I'm not trying to, I'm only speaking about the effect the temperature has. That's what I'm speaking.
Temperature, when you're talking about gases, what did I say?
I know pressure, but...
And?
Pressure, temperature, and container.
And volume. Always.
Yeah, container, volume of container. That's what I said, container. That's what I meant.
Always.
I should have said volume. I should have said volume.
So don't just use temperature. When you say temperature, that's meaningless to me when you're talking about gases for the most part.
Yeah,
Let's try this a different way. Brian, let's just try this a different way. PV equals nRT. How do you apply that to solids?
Sorry, I was on mute. I said, I said it, but I said, no, you don't, because it's a description for gases.
So
you don't employ that to solids.
So when we're describing gases, the principles applicable are different. So you can't have something universally going to apply in terms of heat, in this example, to both liquid and gas, because they behave so differently.
Well, they don't. Heat causes heat, hot and cold, causes the same thing within water, within liquids and gases.
Yeah, but that's just one aspect. There are so many differences between gases, liquids, and solids. It's unimaginable, right? They're completely different.
Yeah, but I'm not arguing that. The point we started on was about convection. Within
convection of what?
Yeah, of a gas.
Okay.
And I argued. I'll clear up. My argument was that the warmer air is becoming less dense and the cooler air is becoming more dense, so they replace each other, as that's how it's described.
Well, for the most part, the hotter air has more kinetic energy, right? It's going to be going every which way really, really fast. But the cooler gases, they're not going to be moving as fast, right? So there's going to be more space in the hotter gas, correct?
Yeah, totally agree. Could that be described as density? Yeah, but can that not be described as density?
No, because that's not the cause of it.
Right. What is density? Even though it's internally inconsistent, what do we use the convention as? What is density?
Mole.
It's the. Sorry, Nathan.
Mole.
What?
Mole per volume. How much you've got of something in a given space.
It's just mass. It's mass over volume. We'll say
Yeah.
matter over volume. That'll be better.
Mass over volume. I just didn't want to use that word, but yes, I just didn't want to get hung up on that word. The amount of stuff in a given volume.
Yes.
Okay. And I gave the example earlier of when you put gas in a balloon and you heat the area it's in, the balloon will expand. But if you put that same balloon into a fridge, the balloon will shrink.
Well, yeah.
So that's the amount of matter within a volume. There's two different. If you use the balloon, there's two different sizes.
No, it's not two different volumes. No, it's not two
Wrong.
different volumes. No, it's not. It's the same balloon.
Perfect, Brian. We've come full circle. This is where the confusion started with me. So this is the point where no, the density does not change if you're going to use that convention. The amount of stuff, careful with my language, doesn't change in the balloon.
Is this an elastic?
Hang on.
That's an elastic balloon.
Because if it is, keep it as a rigid container. Otherwise, you're trying to tweak too many things. Put the pressurizer container, right, then put it in a fridge. But if you've got a balloon, then the pressure will affect the volume. But if you stick with a rigid container, then
a rigid container, yeah.
But that's why I went to a balloon. Because a balloon shows us an expansion and a decrease.
A balloon demonstrates the differential. A balloon demonstrates the differential in terms of temperature difference with regards to gases and liquids. If you fill that balloon up with water, yeah, the volume is not going to be affected by the elasticity of the balloon. There's no effect that the balloon has on the volume of water.
Okay. Right. If I take 1 second then, right, this is why I use the balloon. If I take a balloon at normal room temperature with gas in it, and I fill it, just a normal amount with gas in it, I then heat that balloon will expand. If I bring it back to room temperature and then cool it, it will deflate. So the gas, the same amount of gas is occupying two different spaces, two different size spaces at different temperatures. Because it's
absolutely right, Brian. You're absolutely correct. Absolutely 100% correct, Brian. The density changes because the volume changes with the balloon. Yeah, you're absolutely 100% correct. And QE and Nathan are morons.
No, that idiot up. Second law doesn't apply to the Earth. Get the hell out of here.
You're a moron, QE. Brian knows more about this than you do. You're an utter moron.
Would you shut that moron up?
Brian.
Yes,
no need, because I agree totally. Of course, if it's an elastic balloon, that's what I was saying. You've got to keep it the same. Otherwise,
the volume's changing.
Oranges and apples, aren't you?
Yep.
Well, that's why I use the balloon, because that's the visual of what.
Yeah, because you're changing the volume too. That's the problem.
But I'm not changing the volume. The gas is changing the volume.
The elastic balloon is expanding and contracting. It has elasticity to it.
Yeah, but
I don't even know what the
temperature
question
is changing.
Yeah, but no,
the size of it.
As a consequence of the gas behaviour, yeah, up or down, what the container changes, right? But as a consequence of the temperature change, right? Now, because that happens, that then has another knock-on effect with regards to the gas behaviour. Do you understand? So you're not playing fair. Like I said, your water, it doesn't make a difference, does it? The water's volume is not going to be dictated to in any way by the balloon, but the gas's behaviour will be.
Well, I don't know that. I don't know. I've never done that with a balloon with water. I don't know if heating it will cause the water to expand or deflate with hot and cold. But I know that it will happen with a gas.
The role of the container will not affect the behaviour of the liquid, will it?
Well, the liquid will still behave. Oh, sorry, come on.
If I put it in a balloon that's twice as big or half as small, yeah.
go
the
on.
same thing.
Well,
then the water will change based on the temperature alone. The container has no bounds to what we're describing here as density, does it? It's just going to behave based on that temperature change. But the gas is not. It's not true for the gas.
Well,
yes,
if
it is. The gas,
into
the temperature will affect the gas. Definitely.
If I put gas into a solid container, then and I heat it, you will increase. It will increase pressure inside the container. If I bring the temperature down, it will decrease the pressure. If I put it into a balloon, the balloon will expand with heat, and the balloon will deflate with cold.
Yeah, but hold on, Brian. All you're doing is you're changing the V value as well. So you're increasing heat, but then you're also altering V. That's all they're saying. As you stretch the balloon's material, the volume is going to alter as well.
That's my point. By heating the gas, you are causing it to make the balloon expand, and by cooling it, you're causing it to deflate the balloon. That's the point.
Yeah,
you
but
won't
that's just
see that with a solid container.
Brian. That's a visual manifestation of the gas pressure changing and the increased pressure stretching more of the balloon, so you can see it visually. But the effect is still the same. They're saying if you just want to qualify what the effect is, you don't have a sliding V if you're trying to qualify it. You keep the V constant so you can see the P change.
Yeah, but is that not a bit of a cheat when you're talking about gas?
No, just keep one thing constant.
No, that's Gay-Lussac's law.
Right, yeah, but you can't. The gas has not been allowed to expand then. So it's been called pressure and density is being kept out of it. But yet the density of the gas, if it's expanding out the balloon, it means that the particles.
We're back to the density has changed.
Make the balloon 1,000,000 times bigger.
Oh God!
Well, the gas is still behaving.
Guys, hold on one second. Just don't want the audience to miss anything, and I'm going to shout out a couple of super chats just to be waiting for a while. So sorry, gonna have to hold that thought. Al Junkie, shout out to Arwin. He says Arwin is ace, and I will not stand for it if he is silenced. Thank you very much indeed for the super chat. Also, somebody who gave me a hippopotamus in a a treasure chest LV23. Thank you very much indeed for the $50 super chat. Really appreciate it. Sorry guys, had to do it.
Thanks. Okay, that cleared things up.
It did.
I think you want to create a cheaters with your solid containers.
You're just giving it a sliding V. You're just changing the V so it's sliding scale.
I didn't change anything. The temperature changed it. That's my point. The temperature changes.
No.
Volume changed. Keep everything at the same volume. I don't even know what your question is at this point.
Yeah, but it's about density. Like, I'm keeping the same volume of gas within the balloon, but just through the change of temperature, I'm changing the size of the balloon. So,
but you're not changing the density.
Well, if there's more,
no, you're not.
But I'm changing I'm changing the area it's concentrated in. If you take a square inch of the center of that balloon,
no.
There's still the same number of particles there. You haven't changed that.
Depending on how you hold on, Brian. You can have the same effect induced by changing any single aspect of that formula. For instance, you decrease the volume, the effect will be that you're getting more collisions with the container because there's a decreased surface area. Same if you do that in reverse, increase the surface area by increasing the container. All you're doing is changing the V, akin to increasing and decreasing the balloon size as a net result of a change in pressure. Now you can also introduce more of the gas, increase the density. And you'd have the same effect if you kept the volume the same. Yeah? So in other words, you can induce the same effect by changing one of the aspects described in that law. But it doesn't mean that when you change one of the other aspects, like the volume of the container when you stretch the balloon, that means that the density is increased. No. But just because the density, if you increased it, would have the same effect, doesn't mean that when you change the temperature to induce the effect on the volume of the balloon, that means the density is changing. It doesn't.
Okay, I'll make one last point, and I won't continue arguing after that. If you take the balloon at room temperature with gas in it, you take a square inch of the very center of that balloon. You heat that balloon and it expands. And when you cool that balloon, it deflates. Will the amount of gas particles within that square inch stay the same throughout that whole process?
On average, just within a square inch?
No, because the balloon's expanded.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So
Then
the amount
you've
of-
changed the V.
You're changing the volume.
Changing the
If you
volume
take
then.
rigid
The point I'm
container,
making
Brian.
the point I'm making is that square inch of gas. I know it's not. I don't know how you'd have a square inch of gas, but there's that square inch area, right? Will change in the amount of molecules that's within it.
No, it
due to a
doesn't.
change in temperature.
Brian,
Container's got
let me
bigger.
try a different way. Brian. Brian.
I know the container,
Let me
but
just
that's
try.
why
Let me just try.
Let
me try.
Brian,
Hello.
Brian,
Hello.
Brian,
Let's try one more way.
Brian.
One more way.
Brian,
Try to
come on.
rearrange this formula as
It's
many ways as I
obvious.
possibly can.
Use-
Brian, please. Let's just try it a different way. Let's say you've got a magic machine that's super glued to the outside of the balloon, so that with a mechanical device you can stretch the balloon to its maximum capacity. So you're increasing the volume of the balloon, not because you're introducing more gas, but because you've stretched the balloon out to be bigger. Do you change any of the other variables? Yes, because you've increased the size. But have you introduced more gas? No. Have you made the gas a higher temperature to make it move faster? No. But it's still having less collisions with the walls of the container because you've increased the surface area, the V. But I'm doing it with a machine. You're doing it by changing a different part of the formula, which is introducing a greater temperature or introducing more gas. You know, but you can change different aspects of it by altering different parts of the formula and getting the same end result. I.e., in Boyle's law, you change the size of the container. Yeah, you're going to increase the pressure because you've decreased the container.
Yeah, but you're making my point for me there.
When you put it in,
I'm not trying to. 1 second, sorry.
Let's
I'm
let
not trying
Brian
to catch
finish
you
and then
on
Don.
this.
Go ahead.
No.
After
Okay.
Brian, Don. Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks.
Right. You have to just making my point. You're literally making my point for me because you're admitting that temperature will change. Because I can show what the balloon temperature will change the gas. Temperature will have a change on the gas.
Brian, right. You're describing an effect of the containment, right? Forget that. Just describe what the effect on the gas molecule is by the temperature increase.
Yes, more movement.
Faster.
Or less movement. By the
Faster.
temperature increase.
Well, that's the effect. If
Yeah,
you
but
then
it-
allow that
square inches-
effect, if you then allow that effect to play out with a non-rigid container, yeah, that effect will have another effect, which will have a knock-on effect, won't it? A back loop, yeah. But if you don't allow that effect by just keeping it contained properly, yeah, then you've got your effect there. The molecules will move faster. That's it.
But the molecules will move faster. But the point I'm making is they'll still expand away from each other more.
No, they're not. They're moving faster. Whether
the
they
balloon-
expand
what
away
causes the
from
balloon
each
to
other
expand and
depends
deflate
on the type of containment, doesn't it?
Yeah, but the fact that
Yes.
the balloon expands and deflates with hot and cold shows that
brother.
That's an effect, a secondary effect of on non-rigid containment and caused by making the molecules go faster.
well, but just because you make the
Exactly.
molecules go faster, why is it expanding?
Because they're hitting the walls of the non-rigid container, which applies more force on it, which forces the non-rigid container out.
So
And
you would say
changes
that
the volume.
Yeah, but that's my point.
That's not your point.
It is
Can I-
because
can I have
it goes
a
back
take
to
on
the
that,
density. That was
No.
my point.
The only reason the
was convection.
density, the dodgy description of density with a gas has changed is because you've got a non-rigid container and you've allowed the effect, which is to speed up the gas molecules, to play out on that non-rigid container. And then you're inferring something from that, but you can't.
Okay,
will-
I'll finish with this. One thing. I'll go back to what I said about that square inch within the center of the balloon. Within that area, that little square inch, hot and cold will change the amount of gas particles, molecules within that square inch just by a change in temperature.
Right. I agree in the balloon, but in a rigid container, at any one-time shot, whether it's 5 degrees or 10 degrees or 100 degrees, the number in that square centimeter will be the same.
Yeah, it's just the movement will be more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would like to know the temperature
Yay!
of this. The cold temperature.
We got there in the end, Don Gio.
Yeah, let's
just want to
just celebrate
rejoice.
agreement.
We've got agreement at
Yeah,
the
I was
end.
gonna say-
We've reached consensus
The cryogenics.
on these well-established natural laws. Happy days. Go
I
ahead,
no,
Don
I don't
Gio.
think we have. I don't think we have.
Just let one of the guests. Just got Brian. Just let Don.
I don't want to take over the whole show.
You are currently.
Yeah, you got liquid oxygen that is a chiral.
Just clear the air out, Don. Then you can go. Go ahead, Don.
You got liquid oxygen that's chirogenic liquid, right? So how cold is this temperature you're talking about? The gas, like where you have the gases in, because it can be paramagnetic.
We're not talking about paramagnetism, for fuck's sake. Goodness gracious, man.
Yeah, it's definitely something to
It
tackle.
would be the high pressure that it's under, isn't it, as well, which is forcing the phase change, not necessarily just a component of the temperature. Yeah, particularly because otherwise you've got to get to what is it, minus 160 or something like that, haven't you? Now, under
and
high
what pressure?
Yeah, exactly. So, atmospheric, I think, is
okay. Yeah, you got to keep that the same, right?
Yeah.
Because
No, what happens if we do this?
All three.
What happens if we do it in a
all
balloon?
three kissing cousins. You just can't take one cousin, right?
And that's what I'm saying. If you then put that in a very small container, a huge amount, you induce a phase change.
Yeah,
and that's why you have liquid oxygen in there, not necessarily because you're storing it at that temperature.
Albeit with an incestuous analogy. Yes, QE is correct. These are all interconnected at different points of a triangle, if you like, and you affect one, you affect the other. But it doesn't mean to say that if you're affecting one of those corners of the triangle and inducing an effect as a result, that means that one of the other corners is the cause of it, in this case density, changing temperature. Well, it's thrown a slight spanner in the works when Brian introduces a variable volume, because then you've got to qualify that away. Hopefully we've done that already.
Yep.
Shout out to M for the super chat. Thank you very much indeed. Doesn't say anything, just gives me money. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate it. Is that it? Brian, did you not want to start that again for the fourth time?
Please no.
If you want, I will, but I don't think it's going to go anywhere today.
This is a fascinating subject. I'm glad it's taken the entire show, because we're talking about things that, in reasonable estimations, people haven't got causal attributions established yet. Nobody's done that. So is it reasonable to discuss this? Yeah, it's fascinating. Right, we're on the tip of the spear in terms of understanding the world we live in when we discuss these subjects. You know, this is right on the cutting edge, because the truth be told, nobody knows. Nobody's got the answers. So, yeah, it's an absolutely fantastic subject to discuss. But the problems are always going to come when somebody comes along and tries to assert a causal relationship, or because there isn't an end to that particular path, they start ascribing effects that don't occur, and then ascribing causes to them. That's the problem. That's why we've started this discussion. You know, the assertion of a downward bias. That's where this all began in the pre-show. Well, the assertion of a downward bias in the first instance is not true, but trying to explain, probably in the case of gravity, reasons behind entropic effects, that futile discussion leads you to a just so story that ends up you with people antipode and forces needed to hold you to a ball. That's where this all begins. People just trying to give causal attribution to things that they haven't actually scienced. And, you know, if you haven't got an empirical explanation for something, just keep your mouth shut. Don't start making up stories, because you end up somewhere down the line with somebody humiliating you because one of your assumptions is fundamentally flawed, you know, or can be debunked in this instance with a bit of gas behaviour when you assert a downward bias. So that's why we're on this subject. That's why we're on this tip, because our own side are going down a path that we're trying to rebel against when it comes to heliocentrism. We're fighting against the just so stories that have tried to explain things that are currently unexplainable. And the net result of that is you end up on a bloody ball hanging off from people that are upside down from you. It's crazy. You know, that's where it leads. And, you know, that should be a lesson, and it hasn't been. You know, people want to get straight back on a different path, slightly different fork in the road, and it's just going to end up in humiliation. You know, if you want to establish the cause of an effect, science it. That's what it's there for. Anyway, I'm going to hand over to the pre-show. So with that, I'll say, first and foremost, a huge, massive, enormous thank you to both Discord and G+ panels making today's live show possible. If you are watching this on either Nathan Oakley 1980 or Nathan Oakley premiering streams, however, stay tuned, as there will be an after show to follow. A massive thank you to all of you who smashed the super chat, liked, commented, shared, subscribed, and all that good stuff. Also, below this video, there's a link to get £50 for swapping your UK electricity supplier to Octopus Energy. Once again, stay tuned if you're watching on a premiering stream. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I'll see you all in the next video.
What a lovely day!